The sky over Madrid dawned tinged with a leaden gray that October morning in 1721. Heavy clouds seemed to foreshadow what was about to unfold in the royal chambers of the Buen Retiro Palace. Queen Isabel of Farnese, second wife of King Philip V, awoke with a sharp pain that coursed through her abdomen like a dagger. The pregnancy had been fraught with difficulties from the start, but both the royal physicians and the court astrologers had assured that all would be well. "Summon Dr. Servi," at once cried one of the ladies-in-waiting, while another rushed through the labyrinthine corridors of the palace, her footsteps echoing against the stone walls. News of the queen's premature labor spread through the court like wildfire. King Philip, a direct descendant of the House of Bourbon and grandson of the Sun King of France, was at that moment praying in the royal chapel, lost in one of his frequent bouts of deep melancholy. The mental affliction that had tormented him for years, the same that had plagued generations of European monarchs, seemed to have intensified during the final months of his wife's pregnancy. Giuseppe Servi, the Queen's personal Italian physician, arrived breathless at the royal chamber. The scene he encountered chilled his blood. Isabel was pale as wax, drenched in sweat while the sheets were stained crimson. "Your Majesty, we must act urgently," he announced firmly, though unable to hide his concern. The midwives had already prepared clean cloths, herbal infusions, and the instruments necessary for what everyone hoped would be a difficult but successful delivery. No one was prepared for what would happen in the hours that followed. In a corner of the room, Louisa of Orleans, a distant cousin of the king and one of the queen's ladies-in-waiting, observed the scene with an inscrutable expression. Her eyes, a deep, almost violet blue, did not reflect the worry that marked the faces of the other women present. Instead, she seemed to study every movement, every gesture, as if watching the unfolding of a long-devised plan. "Altea, you should retire," suggested one of the older ladies, scandalized by the blood now staining the marble floor. "I'll stay," Louisa replied, her voice as calm as it was resolute. "The queen may need me." What no one knew, what no one could even imagine, was that Louisa harbored a secret as dark as the passageways winding through the palace's depths. A secret rooted in generations past, now on the verge of manifesting in the most dreadful way. Isabel of Farnese screamed with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. Dr. Servi, his hands already bloodied, paled as he noticed something unusual. There are two heads," he murmured, unable to believe his eyes. "But they're joined." The silence that followed his words was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Louisa of Orleans approached the bed slowly, her deliberate steps resounding on the marble. "It's the curse," she whispered so softly only the doctor could hear. "The blood always demands its price." Dr. Servi trained in the finest universities of Italy, and France had never witnessed anything like it. The twins, for they were two girls, were joined at the torso, sharing what appeared to be a single heart. Their small, identical, perfect faces cruelly contrasted with the deformity that condemned them. "They won't survive," the doctor declared, wiping the sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "And the queen is losing too much blood." As Isabel's screams echoed through the royal chambers, King Philip V remained kneeling in the chapel, unaware of the drama unfolding mere meters away. His lips muttered incoherent prayers blending Latin and French, beseeching a god who seemed to have abandoned him long ago. "His Majesty should be informed," suggested one of the advisors waiting outside the royal chamber. "Absolutely not," interjected Cardinal Alberoni, the Queen's trusted first minister. "The king's state is too fragile. This could shatter what little remains of his sanity." In the royal chamber, Isabel of Farnese had lost consciousness. The conjoined twins, still attached by the umbilical cord, emitted faint whimpers that foretold their imminent end. It was then that Louisa of Orleans made a decision that would alter the course of Spanish history. With a swift motion, she drew from her garments a small glass vial containing an amber liquid. "Everyone leave," she ordered with an authority unbecoming of her rank. "Dr. Servi and I will tend to the queen." Something in her tone, perhaps the same power that had kept the House of Habsburg on the throne for centuries, despite inbreeding and hereditary diseases, compelled the ladies and servants to obey without question. When the door closed behind the last maid, Louisa approached the Italian doctor. "What I'm about to show you, doctor, must remain between us if you value your life and the kingdom's stability," she said as she uncorked the vial. "This elixir has been the best-kept secret of European royalty for generations. The doctor, skeptical but desperate, watched as Louisa poured 3 drops of the liquid onto the queen's bloodless lips and 3 more onto the foreheads of the joined infants. "It's impossible," Servi murmured minutes later as color began to return to Isabel's cheeks and the twins' cries grew stronger. "It's against nature. It's the price of power," Louisa replied with an enigmatic smile. "Blood calls to blood, doctor. Marriages between cousins and uncles with nieces have kept power within the same families, but nature always collects its debt." Outside in the gardens of the Buen Retiro, the sky finally broke open and a torrential rain began to fall over Madrid. Courtiers interpreted the phenomenon as a divine sign, unaware that in the royal chambers, a miracle as inexplicable as it was terrible was unfolding. The twins survived against all medical odds and natural laws. Isabel of Farnese regained enough health to maintain her influence at court, though she was never the same. The secret of that October morning was sealed between Louisa of Orleans and Dr. Servi through a pact of silence neither would ever break. What no one could foresee was that those girls baptized as Maria Teresa and Maria Antonia would grow to become the center of an intricate web of conspiracies, ambitions, and secrets that would threaten the very foundations of the Spanish monarchy. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the palace's passageways, ancestral whispers seemed to repeat the same warning over and over. The blood always demands its price. 18 years later, the royal palace of Madrid buzzed with activity under the stifling July heat. The court of Ferdinand VI, son of the late Philip II, was preparing for an unprecedented event, the official presentation of the twin infantas Maria Teresa and Maria Antonia, daughters of the late Queen Isabel of Farnese, who had been hidden from public view since their birth. The mystery surrounding the young princesses had fueled all manner of rumors for years. Some courtiers claimed the infantas suffered from a terrible deformity. Others whispered that their beauty was so extraordinary that the king feared it might spark diplomatic conflicts with other European royal houses. The truth, as always, was far more complex and sinister. "Are you certain this is wise?" Your Majesty asked the Marquis of Ensenada, the king's chief minister, as they reviewed the final details of the ceremony. "The consequences could be—" "The decision is made," Ferdinand VI interrupted his tone, brooking no argument. "Spain needs alliances, and my sisters are valuable bargaining chips, regardless of their condition." The Marquis bowed his head in obedience, but worry lingered in his eyes. As one of the few who knew the true nature of the infantas, he understood the risks of revealing their existence to the world. In a remote wing of the palace, far from the bustle of preparations, the twins readied themselves for their debut with mixed emotions. Joined from sternum to navel, Maria Teresa and Maria Antonia had developed personalities as distinct as they were complementary. Teresa, dominant and calculating, typically made decisions for both. Antonia, more sensitive and observant, possessed an almost supernatural intuition that had often saved them from dangerous situations. "They shouldn't parade us like circus animals," Teresa protested as a dozen maids worked to adjust the elaborate gown designed to conceal their unique anatomy. "Perhaps it's our chance to see the world beyond these walls," Antonia replied softly. Her eyes fixed on the reflection in the mirror, 2 identical beautiful faces atop a shared body, a masterpiece of nature and an aberration at once. Louisa of Orleans, now a middle-aged woman who had maintained her influence at court despite changes in reign, entered the room with measured steps. The maids withdrew immediately, aware of the strange authority she wielded over the infantas. "Your Highnesses look magnificent," Louisa declared, critically assessing the final result. "No one will be able to resist your singularity." "Singularity," Teresa retorted bitterly. "You mean monstrosity?" Louisa approached the young women and in an unusually intimate gesture cupped their faces in her hands. "Never forget who you are," she whispered. "You carry the most powerful blood in Europe in your veins. Your condition is not a curse, but a sign." A sign of what? Asked Antonia, always more receptive to her mentor's cryptic words. "Of the price we pay for power," Louisa replied. "Generations of marriages between kin to preserve the purity of royal blood. Every deformity, every broken mind, every weak or infertile prince, it's all part of the price." The twins fell silent, absorbing words they had heard in various forms throughout their secluded existence. Since childhood, Louisa had instilled in them the idea that their condition was the visible result of centuries of royal inbreeding, but she had also taught them to see it as a source of power, not shame. Meanwhile, in the throne room, ambassadors from France, England, Portugal, and Austria awaited with anticipation the moment to meet Spain's mysterious infantas. The marriage of a royal princess could seal alliances capable of shifting Europe's balance of power, and all had precise instructions to evaluate the twins' potential as royal consorts, regardless of rumors about their supposed deformity. "They say they're witches," the Portuguese ambassador murmured to his French counterpart. "That they can read minds and predict the future?" "Nonsense," the Frenchman replied dismissively. "The only certainty is they've been hidden for a reason, and that's rarely a good sign." The Austrian ambassador, more astute than his colleagues, remained silent. As a representative of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, who had managed to hold the Habsburg Empire together despite the War of the Austrian Succession, he had instructions to closely observe any signs of the hereditary diseases that had plagued the House of Austria for generations. The sound of trumpets announced the imminent arrival of the king and his entourage. Courtiers formed two perfect rows on either side of the hall, while foreign ambassadors took their places of honor near the throne. Ferdinand VI, dressed in the sobriety characteristic of his reign, advanced with a firm step, followed by Queen Barbara of Braganza and the court's principal members. Today, the king announced in a clear voice, "Spain presents to the world two of its most precious treasures. My sisters, the Infantas, Maria Theresa and Maria Antonia, have devoted their youth to study and contemplation, preparing to serve their country as befits their noble blood." A murmur of anticipation swept through the hall. All eyes turned to the side door through which the princesses were to enter. When the doors finally opened and absolute silence fell, the twins advanced with an otherworldly grace, as if floating across the marble floor. Their silver and blue silk gown, designed to conceal their condition, created an almost perfect illusion of normalcy. Their identical faces, ethereally beautiful and reminiscent of the Habsburg infantas of the previous century, displayed a serenity that contrasted with the inner turmoil both felt. It was only when they reached the throne and performed the ceremonial curtsy that some noticed something odd in their movements, an overly perfect synchronization, a limitation in the distance they could maintain between them. "My dear sisters," said the king, taking one hand from each twin in a calculated gesture to distract the keenest observers. "Your presence honors the court of Spain." The foreign ambassadors stepped forward one by one to pay their respects. The French representative, with the characteristic gallantry of the Versailles court, kissed the hands of both infantas with studied elegance, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise as he noted their unusual proximity. "His Most Christian Majesty Louis XIV sends his warmest greetings to the illustrious infantas of Spain," he declared in perfect Castilian. "The fame of your beauty and virtue has reached France." Teresa, always direct, responded with a calculated smile. "We thank His Most Christian Majesty for his words, especially considering our existence has been a secret until today." A flash of discomfort crossed the ambassador's face, quickly masked by a diplomatic smile. The Austrian representative, with the cold precision of the Viennese court, studied the twins with barely disguised scientific scrutiny. "Her Imperial Majesty Maria Theresa sends her fraternal greetings," he said, emphasizing the name shared with one of the infantas. "The Empress is particularly curious to learn more about your experiences." Antonia, catching the deeper meaning behind his words, replied with a sweetness that concealed a sharp edge. "Tell the Empress we would be delighted to share our experiences with her. Perhaps she'll find familiarity in our circumstances." The Austrian paled slightly, understanding the veiled reference to the Habsburgs' own genetic issues, from which Empress Maria Theresa was a direct descendant. The ceremony continued with apparent normalcy, but beneath the courtly surface simmered currents of astonishment, repulsion, fascination, and political calculation. As musicians played a solemn pavane, the twins stood by the throne, acutely aware of every glance, whisper, and disguised grimace of horror. "They're terrified," Teresa whispered to her sister, her lips barely moving. "It's not terror," Antonia corrected. "It's recognition. They see in us the reflection of their own secrets." Across the hall, Louisa of Orléans watched the scene with barely contained satisfaction. 18 years of careful planning had culminated in this moment. Far from being a shame to the crown, the conjoined twins had become a living symbol of the price paid for dynastic power, a symbol that in her hands could become the most potent weapon in European politics. Meanwhile, in the depths of the palace, Dr. Servi, now an old man consumed by the secrets he had kept for decades, reviewed his meticulously documented journal on the twins' development since their miraculous birth. Pages of medical observations mingled with philosophical reflections on the nature of power and blood. Samani, the blood always demands its price, he wrote with a trembling hand on the final page. And the price is never merely physical. He closed the journal and sealed it with red wax, imprinting it with the intertwined emblems of the Bourbons and the double-headed Habsburg eagle. Then, with slow but precise movements, he placed it in an iron box alongside the vial of the mysterious elixir Louisa of Orleans had entrusted to him for emergencies. "May God have mercy on Spain," he murmured as he locked the box. "And may God have mercy on us all." In the throne room, oblivious to these events, the twin infantas danced with perfectly synchronized movements, as if they were one person rather than two. Courtiers watched with a mix of horror and fascination, unable to tear their eyes away from this marvel of nature that defied all known laws. "Do you feel it?" Antonia whispered, barely audible. "Yes," Teresa replied. "The power, our power." And as they twirled to the music, their minds as united as their bodies, they conceived a plan that would forever alter the destiny of Spain and all of Europe. The spring of 1750 brought winds of change that shook the foundations of European courts. The marriage treaty uniting the twin infantas with the Portuguese heir Prince José Francisco had been signed after months of tense negotiations, sealing an unprecedented alliance between the two Iberian powers. The news provoked mixed reactions in the chancelleries of Paris, London, and Vienna, where diplomats and spies scrambled to decipher the implications of such an extraordinary agreement. In the private quarters of the infantas, Teresa and Antonia received the final adjustments to their nuptial gown, a masterpiece of textile engineering designed to both conceal and dignify their condition. "Do you think José Francisco is prepared?" Antonia asked, referring to the Portuguese prince who would soon become their shared husband. Teresa let out a dry laugh. "They've been preparing him for months, sister. They've shown him anatomical drawings, medical reports, even brought in doctors from across Europe to explain our singularity. But understanding it intellectually is one thing," Antonia insisted. "Accepting it emotionally is another. He'll have no choice," Teresa cut in with her characteristic cold determination. "The treaty includes clauses too valuable for Portugal. Besides, they need our American gold as much as we need their support against England." The door opened without warning, admitting Louisa of Orleans. At her age, the lady retained the same commanding presence as decades before, though her once raven-black hair was now entirely white. "Your Highnesses must hurry," she announced with the authority granted by years of service to the crown. "The Portuguese ambassador has arrived with the official portrait of Prince José Francisco." The twins exchanged a quick glance. Though they had seen miniatures of their future husband, the official portrait marked another step toward the inevitability of their fate. "And how does he look?" Antonia asked, unable to hide her nervousness. Louisa offered an enigmatic smile. "Surprisingly favorable considering the history of consanguinity in the House of Braganza. Prominent chin, but not to the point of deformity. Clear eyes, though somewhat close-set. Overall, an acceptable appearance." Teresa snorted with disdain. "As if we had the right to be choosy about our husband's looks." "You have every right," Louisa replied with sudden intensity, approaching the twins. "Never forget that your condition makes you the perfect heirs to a legacy of power stretching back centuries. You are the physical manifestation of what dynastic ambition has been willing to sacrifice." The maids finished adjusting the gown and withdrew discreetly, leaving the three women alone. Louisa seized the moment to draw a small object wrapped in black silk from her garments. "It's time you knew the whole truth," she said, unwrapping what revealed itself to be a gold-framed miniature. "This portrait has been hidden for decades by your father's express order." The twins studied the painting with growing curiosity. It depicted a young woman bearing an extraordinary resemblance to them, but with one fundamental difference: she was a single person with no apparent deformity. "Who is she?" Antonia asked, though something within her already whispered the answer. "Your mother," Louisa replied. "Not Isabel of Farnese, as you've been led to believe, but Maria Luisa Gabriela of Savoy, Philip the Refre's first wife and my first cousin." The revelation struck the twins like lightning. Teresa was the first to react. Impossible. "Maria Luisa died in 1714, 7 years before our birth." "That's what the official history says," Louisa nodded. "The truth is far more complex. Maria Luisa didn't die, not entirely. Her body was preserved through an ancient alchemical procedure known only to a handful of initiates in royal secrets. Antonia, always more intuitive, connected the dots faster. The elixir, the same one you used to save us when we were born. Luisa nodded slowly. The elixir of Paracelsus, perfected by Arab physicians during Spain's occupation and passed down secretly through generations of European royalty. It cannot grant eternal life, but it can suspend vital processes for limited periods or accelerate healing in extreme cases. Are you saying our true mother was suspended for years? Teresa asked, her incredulity giving way to fascinated horror. 7 years to be exact, Luisa confirmed. Philip V, devastated by Maria Luisa's apparent death, secretly ordered the procedure. When Isabel of Farnese became the new queen, the experiment continued in the palace catacombs unbeknownst to her. In 1721, when the physicians determined Maria Luisa could be briefly awakened, Philip arranged one final encounter with her. And from that encounter we were born. Antonia completed, her voice barely a whisper. Precisely. But the suspension process had altered Maria Luisa's very nature. The pregnancy progressed abnormally, and when the time came for delivery, complications arose. Isabel of Farnese, who by then had discovered the secret, agreed to pretend the pregnancy was hers, to protect the king's reputation and the kingdom's stability. The twins remained silent, grappling with the magnitude of the revelation. Their entire lives had been built on lies, but this truth was more fantastical than any lie imaginable. Why tell us now? Teresa asked, finally, ever practical, even in the face of extraordinary revelations. Luisa carefully tucked away the miniature before answering. Because you're about to marry, and your children may inherit peculiarities, you need to fully understand your heritage to protect and prepare them. Children, Antonia repeated, a mix of longing and fear in her voice. The doctors aren't even sure we can conceive. Oh, you will, Luisa asserted with unsettling certainty. The elixir in your veins ensures not only your survival, but your fertility. The question isn't whether you'll conceive, but what you'll conceive. In the ambassador's hall, oblivious to this transcendental conversation, Ferdinand VI received the Portuguese envoy with appropriate pomp. The official portrait of Prince José Francisco, life-sized and framed in solid gold, now held a prominent place beside the throne. His Royal Highness has expressed impatience to meet the infantas in person, the ambassador remarked with studied diplomacy. Reports of their singular condition have piqued his scientific interest. My brother has always had a weakness for natural curiosities, the king replied with a tight smile. I trust he will treat my sisters with the respect and dignity their royal blood deserves. The ambassador bowed momentarily, concealing his expression. Of course, Your Majesty. The prince fully understands the historical importance of this union. What the diplomat did not mention were the long nights the prince had spent consulting physicians, anatomists, and even witches from the Brazilian colonies trying to grasp the practical implications of marrying two women who shared a single body. Nor did he mention the rumors circulating in the Lisbon court about the potential heirs of such an extraordinary union. Meanwhile, in the royal library, the aging Dr. Servi completed transcribing his final observations about the infantas. His notes, written in a cryptic blend of Italian and medical Latin, would be sent secretly to a colleague at the University of Padua, ensuring that decades of accumulated knowledge would not be lost with his death. The twins have achieved a mental synchronization that defies all scientific explanation, he wrote with a trembling hand. They often complete each other's sentences or react simultaneously to stimuli perceived by only one. Even more extraordinary is their ability to maintain independent thoughts while sharing physical sensations. The doctor paused, contemplating whether to include his most controversial observations. Finally, he decided posterity deserved the full truth. I have concluded that the infantas are not truly two persons in one body, but a single consciousness divided into two distinct manifestations. Teresa represents pragmatic intellect, Antonia empathetic intuition. Together they form a complete being whose capabilities surpass those of an ordinary human. If my theories are correct, their descendants may inherit not only physical anomalies, but also unprecedented mental capacities. May God help us if this power falls into the wrong hands. In the palace gardens, oblivious to these intrigues, preparations for the wedding proceeded at a frenetic pace. Carpenters, gardeners, and decorators transformed the flower beds into a stage worthy of the century's most talked about union. From dawn to well into the night, the flurry of servants and artisans never ceased overseen by the unrelenting eye of the Marquis of Ensenada, who had personally taken responsibility for ensuring every detail was perfect. Portuguese flowers must alternate with Spanish ones in every arrangement. He ordered the florist consulting the sketches approved by the king. It's a symbol of the union of both crowns, and nothing can be left to chance. Nearby, shaded by a centuries-old cypress, two men conversed in whispers. The English and French ambassadors, fierce rivals in Europe's diplomatic arena, had found common ground in the implications of the impending wedding. If this union produces viable heirs, the balance of power in Europe could shift irrevocably. The Englishman remarked, his impassive face masking his concern. A unified Iberia with access to the America's wealth and France's support? Don't assume our support so quickly, the Frenchman interrupted with a tense smile. Louis XIV watches these events with as much unease as your George II. The dynastic implications are troubling. You mean the inbreeding, the Englishman asked. Your Bourbons are hardly in a position to point fingers. I mean, the Frenchman said, lowering his voice further, the rumors about the Infanta's true nature. Our informants suggest their condition isn't merely physical. Talk of extraordinary mental abilities, Spanish superstitions surely. Are you certain? How do you explain that two beings physically joined have developed such distinct yet complementary personalities? Or that they can reportedly speak simultaneously in different languages? There are verified reports that Teresa can hold a conversation in German while Antonia answers questions in Italian. The Englishman fell silent, his Protestant skepticism wrestling with the evidence he had witnessed during diplomatic audiences with the Infantas. Be that as it may, he continued after a pause, our respective monarchs have ordered us to observe and report, not interfere. For now, the Frenchman added, a calculating glint in his eyes. Inside the palace in the royal council chamber, Ferdinand VI met with his ministers to discuss the final details of the marriage treaty. The document, over 200 pages long and written in the Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin, included clauses anticipating nearly every contingency from succession to the potential need for annulment. The clause concerning offspring is particularly problematic, the Secretary of State noted, pointing to a densely written paragraph. The Portuguese insist that any child born of this union be considered Portuguese if born in Lisbon and Spanish if born in Madrid. A Solomonic solution, the king remarked ironically, for an unprecedented problem. The real issue, Your Majesty, interjected the royal confessor. A Dominican with a piercing gaze, is the sacramental question. The Holy See has granted the necessary dispensation for this highly unusual marriage, but with strict conditions. What conditions? The king asked, though his expression suggested he already anticipated the answer. A papal observer must be present in the nuptial chamber during consummation, the Dominican replied, carefully avoiding the monarch's gaze to verify the sacramental validity of the act. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Finally, the Marquis of Ensenada cleared his throat discreetly. Perhaps we could negotiate a less intrusive alternative, a medical examination afterward. The Holy See is inflexible on this point, the confessor insisted. Given the unprecedented nature of this union, the Church must ensure all canonical requirements are met. Ferdinand VI massaged his temples, feeling the onset of one of the migraines he had inherited from his father, along with his melancholy. Very well. Inform my sisters and let them decide whether to accept this condition or prefer we renegotiate the treaty. In their quarters, unaware of this specific discussion, but fully conscious of the diplomatic complexities surrounding them, the Infantas continued their conversation with Louisa of Orleans. What happened to our true mother after our birth? Antonia asked, still processing the revelation about their origins. Louisa sighed deeply before responding. The delivery exhausted the last reserves of vitality the elixir had preserved. Maria Luisa Gabriela lived long enough to see and name you, but she died hours later, this time definitively. And our father Teresa inquired, did he know we existed? Philip saw you once on the day of your birth, Louisa replied, her expression unreadable. The shock was so great that he suffered one of his most severe episodes of melancholy. For weeks he remained catatonic, muttering incoherent phrases about the price of blood. When he finally recovered, he had either forgotten or chosen to forget your existence. That's why you raised us, Antonia deduced, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. Not out of loyalty to Isabel of Farnese, but out of duty to your cousin Maria Luisa, and out of duty to the blood we all share, Louisa added. The same blood you must now pass on to the Portuguese crown. Teresa, ever pragmatic, steered the conversation to more immediate concerns. Is Prince José Francisco truly prepared for this union, not just the public ceremony, but what comes after? Luisa offered an enigmatic smile. The prince has received specialized education in recent months. His tutors have included not only theologians and physicians, but also experienced courtesans who have instructed him in the complexities of pleasing two minds in a single body. Antonia blushed deeply while Teresa maintained her impassive expression, though a slight flush betrayed her discomfort. Moreover, Luisa continued, the prince possesses his own singularity, though less visible than yours. What do you mean? The twins asked in unison, a spontaneous synchronization that occurred when something captured their attention equally. José Francisco, like you, descends from generations of consanguineous marriages. The House of Braganza has preserved its line through cousin unions for centuries. In his case, the result is not physical, but sensory. In Portugal, they call it avisado interna, inner vision. Clairvoyance, Teresa asked skeptically. Not exactly. It's more a form of extreme empathy that allows him to perceive the thoughts and emotions of those who share his blood. A capacity, I'm told, that intensifies with physical proximity. The twins exchanged a meaningful glance. The prospect of marrying someone capable of sensing their thoughts added a new dimension to their already complex situation. Why didn't you tell us this before? Teresa demanded, irritation evident in her tone. Because I needed to be certain, Luisa replied calmly. My informants in the Portuguese court only confirmed these rumors a week ago. And now that I know for sure, I can tell you this trait makes him the ideal consort for you. Ideal, Antonia questioned. Invasive, Teresa countered, then, after a moment's reflection, added, or convenient, depending on how we use this information. Luisa nodded, pleased by Teresa's quick adaptation to the new circumstances. Exactly. This union is not just political, it's evolutionary. Your children could combine your abilities with his creating a new generation of rulers with unprecedented capabilities. Assuming we can have children, Antonia qualified, always more cautious on the subject. Oh, you will, Luisa affirmed with unsettling certainty. I've consulted with Dr. Servi. Your reproductive organs are fully functional and independent. You could even carry simultaneous pregnancies from different fathers, though in this case, of course, the father will be the same. The implications of that possibility left the twins momentarily speechless. It was Teresa who finally broke the silence. This is all part of some larger plan, something you've been orchestrating for decades. Luisa met Teresa's piercing gaze without flinching. Everything is part of the grand dynastic design, my dear. Europe's royal houses have been experimenting with blood for centuries, seeking to preserve and enhance certain traits. Sometimes the price has been high: the Habsburg jaw, the hemophilia of Victoria's descendants, the madness of the Bourbons. But every sacrifice has served a greater purpose. And what is that purpose? Antonia asked, her voice barely a whisper. The evolution of royalty, Luisa replied with near religious fervor. The creation of a lineage of rulers so superior to the rest of humanity as humans are to apes. You are simply the next step in that path, the most visible thus far, but not the last. Before the twins could fully process this revelation, the door opened, admitting a maid who announced the arrival of the royal confessor. Your Highnesses, the Dominican said after a bow, I bring a message concerning a condition imposed by His Holiness for the validity of the marriage sacrament. As the confessor explained the papal requirements, Teresa's face grew progressively harder, while Antonia's showed increasing mortification. Luisa listened with a neutral expression, though a keen observer might have noticed the calculation in her eyes. It's unacceptable, Teresa declared when the Dominican finished. We refuse to be observed like zoo animals. The alternative, the confessor replied coldly, would be to forego the papal blessing, which would invalidate the marriage in the eyes of the Church, and thus all Catholic courts of Europe. There must be another solution, Antonia interjected, ever the mediator. Perhaps if the observer were a woman, a respected nun, she suggested. The Holy See insists it be a direct representative of the Pope, a prelate of high rank, the Dominican replied firmly. Luisa, who had remained silent, stepped forward. What if the observer were the apostolic nuncio in Madrid? His Excellency Monsignor Enrico Enriquez is known for his discretion and sensitivity. The confessor considered the suggestion. It could be acceptable provided the nuncio agrees to this unusual responsibility. I'll personally speak with him, Luisa offered. We have some family history that might facilitate the negotiation. When the confessor withdrew, the twins looked at Luisa questioningly. Family history with the Nuncio, Teresa asked, raising an eyebrow. Monsignor Enriquez is a third cousin of my late husband, Luisa explained with an enigmatic smile, and he has his own secrets he'd prefer to keep hidden. Leave this matter to me. In the days that followed, Madrid transformed with the arrival of the Portuguese delegation. Prince José Francisco, a 25-year-old with a characteristic prominent Braganza chin, but otherwise pleasing appearance, was received with all the honors befitting his rank. Per protocol, he was not permitted to see his future brides until the eve of the wedding, when a brief formal meeting took place in the presence of both courts. The moment the prince first laid eyes on the twins was etched in the memory of all present. Unlike most who tried to mask their shock or repulsion, José Francisco displayed genuine fascination. His unusually intense blue eyes, fixed alternately on Teresa and Antonia, as if seeing beyond their identical faces. "Your highnesses are even more extraordinary than I was told," he declared, in a clear voice free of discomfort. "It is an honor beyond words to be chosen as your consort. The honor is ours, Your Highness," Teresa replied with studied formality. "We hope our union brings prosperity to both kingdoms," Antonia added, with a warmth that contrasted with her sister's coolness. The prince smiled, a gesture that transformed his face, making it almost handsome. "It will bring far more than that, I'm certain. It will bring a new dawn for the peninsula." Something in his tone and the intensity of his gaze sent a simultaneous shiver through the twins. For the first time in their memory, both felt the exact same emotion at the same moment, a mix of anticipation and fear of the unknown. That night, as the court celebrated a lavish banquet in honor of the betrothed, Dr. Servi made his final visit to the Infantas. The elderly physician, whose health had visibly deteriorated in recent months, handed them a small, intricately carved wooden box. "Inside, you'll find my complete journal on your case, along with my observations and theories," he explained in a weak but firm voice. "There's also a vial of the elixir, enough for a single dose. Use it only in extreme necessity, preferably during a complicated birth." "Why give this to us now?" Antonia asked, sensing the answer. "Because my time is near its end, Your Highness. I've served the Spanish crown for 50 years, and you since your miraculous birth. Now I must entrust you with the secrets I've kept, so you can protect yourselves and your descendants." Teresa took the box with solemnity. "Your service will not be forgotten, Doctor." "I ask only one thing in return," Servi continued, his voice now barely audible. "When the time comes when you fully understand what you are and what you could become, remember your humanity. The power of the blood is great, but so is its price." That same night, as the Infantas slept, Dr. Giuseppe Servi passed away peacefully in his bed. The news was not announced publicly until after the wedding, to avoid casting a shadow over the celebrations, but Luisa of Orleans was informed immediately. "Rest in peace, old friend," she murmured as she personally sealed the doctor's quarters to prevent access to any remaining documents. "Your work is done. Mine is just beginning." The next morning, under a radiant sun that seemed to bless the union, Madrid's bells announced the start of the wedding ceremony that would forever change the destiny of two nations, and though no one yet suspected it, the future of European royalty itself. "The blood always demands its price," Luisa whispered as she watched the twins advance toward the altar where their fate awaited. "But some prices are worth paying."